It's time once again for Dialogue Conspiracy with Mae Brussell. For the past 14 years, Mae has been researching and uncovering facts and evidence from between the lines of the news in order to provide a more thorough knowledge of how conspiracy, political assassination, and abuses of power affect us all. Dialogue Conspiracy originates with KLRB Carmel, California. And now, Mae Brussell.
Good evening. This is Mae Brussell. It's Sunday evening in Carmel, California. Our new time on Dialogue Conspiracy, and it's October the 2nd, 1977. This is Dialogue Conspiracy number 269, for those of you that listen and keep track of the tapes each week. I'm going to spend the bulk of the evening discussing the ABC television program, The Distortion of the Facts of the Warren Commission. This is the package of 1977. Every few years, the major broadcasting systems have to come up with distortions on the killing of John Kennedy. But I think I get more angry every year because after 14 years of evidence and documents to show that there was a blatant conspiracy and to take the conspiracy right to the doors of the Pentagon and the Central Intelligence Agency, the network has the need to continue the massive assault of lies and pure propaganda, and that's what it is at this stage. And because of what they did, and because I'm so angry at this two-part radio show, 2 hours each, this week 4 hours from ABC and the future CBS program, I'm going to share with you on Dialogue Conspiracy a fact about the Kennedy assassination, which has not yet ever been told on the radio or TV, because so many lives are involved and so many witnesses are being killed. I'm going to tell you who, according to Mr. William Altman, ordered the killing of John Kennedy, who at the highest level wanted John Kennedy killed and started the ball of wax going, the story of the assassination moving along in fact. And these are the facts. The Pentagon and the higher-ups had to be given orders by somebody, and they were, according to the Dutch journalist Bernard Altman. The news that I do want to share before we get into the ABC program with their distortion of facts has to do, just briefly, in the next few weeks and the next month, you'll be hearing a lot about the Howard Hughes will that will be decided, the so-called Mormon will in Las Vegas, Nevada. You know that I'm very anxious to see this story of the Hughes unfold. I believe it's the biggest story in the country, even bigger than just the assassination of John Kennedy, because it goes into many, many assassinations and cover-ups and really the whole Cold War era. The trial of the Mormon will was supposed to begin this week, but it's been put off until November. Some new people have surfaced who are determined to prove that Howard Hughes was dead long before, or out of sight at least, by 1968 and couldn't possibly have written the Mormon will. Terry Moore had a press conference in Las Vegas this week. It was in the Las Vegas Sun. It wasn't carried over the Associated Press or United Press. She claims that she is the widow of Howard Hughes, that she was married to him for 8 years. She's filed a claim in the estate in Las Vegas and in Los Angeles. Terry Moore says the Mormon will is a fake. She says Howard wouldn't leave Dumar a quarter. That's the gentleman that was supposed to give him a lift on the road. He wouldn't have paid it back at all. Howard didn't pay people money back, even for that amount that he borrowed, much less $1.5 million. She claims he loathed his relatives. He never intended to make Nevada his home. He wanted money to go to the Hughes Medical Institute. Terry Moore said this money shouldn't go to the government or the CIA or the relatives or the Mormon Mafia or the Palace Guard or whatever you call them. The tax-exempt medical institute that was supposed to be receiving money for research, she says, is simply 2 empty buildings in Miami controlled by Bill Gay. There's a article, it was in Playboy, I believe, January of last year, that said the Miami Institute, the Medical Institute, was merely a dummy front for supporting various congressmen, 20 or 30 specifically, that are in power now, including Gerald Ford. It's a conduit where our tax dollars go to the Medical Institute via government contracts and go back to buy everyone from the president on down through the Supreme Court and to the local officials. She says that Howard really wanted money for medical research and that she wants control of this estate or the money so that she can really put it to what Howard wanted. And she also said in a press conference, do you think I'm going to keep these people? She said they've stolen too much already. They allowed Howard to die. They neglected his needs. That is Terry Moore, who has put a claim on the estate in Las Vegas and in Los Angeles. Douglas Wallace is an ex-Mormon who was very active in trying to get the first black into the priesthood in the Mormon church. That same Douglas Wallace is the one that was staying at the home of Dr. John Fitzgerald that I spoke about in Dialogue Conspiracy number 266 back in April 25th, 1977. I briefly mentioned a shooting in Salt Lake City. Dr. John Fitzgerald's home was under surveillance. He's a very liberal religious person who objects to the racism and the anti-women's faction of the Mormon Church. And he's been very active in trying to spearhead some liberal changes in the Mormon Church. And at his home was Douglas Wallace, the gentleman, as I say, who tried to get a black ordained into the priesthood. At the time, a police officer by the name of David W. Olson from the police department in Salt Lake City was outside the home early in the morning of Dr. Fitzgerald when Douglas Wallace was visiting Salt Lake City. Another plainclothes policeman came up and probably thought it was either Mr. Wallace coming home or Mr. Fitzgerald coming home, and he shot and permanently paralyzed this other plainclothesman in front of the house at that hour of the morning. Neither of them should have been there, and they were out of their territory, and that's another story in itself. But Douglas Wallace was not killed. The officer was paralyzed, and now, as an attorney, he's going to Las Vegas, Nevada, and file a claim for the people of the United States of America that this money belongs to the people, that Howard Hughes is not buried in Houston, Texas, that Vance Cooper is buried there, and so these men are on the same track that I've been on since I published the article in 1974 that Howard Hughes had been buried in 1971. There also is another person I can't name, a third witness, an employee of the Hughes organization, who's going to produce positive proof that Howard Hughes was dead for a long time. And this is based upon some other first-hand documents. So the subject that I've been very close to, what I call the Nazification of America, is going to break apart if these people succeed and stay well and get together. But you could kill 1,000 people and the truth would come out, or 3,000, the truth will come out. And they are in the forefront now of fighting for the truth. But they're not just doing it for themselves. They're doing it for us, and I wish them well. I just read an article this last week about 8 members of the Lincoln Brigade who went to Spain to fight the Civil War in 1937, had a reunion in Spain on the same hills, and one of the men who's still alive has lost his brother there fighting. And out of the 3,000 Americans that went to Spain to fight Franco and to fight Nazi Germany and Mussolini's troops, 1,000 were killed, and 8, as I say, had a reunion this last month or last week. And it was very poignant because they claimed that had people listened to them, World War II might never have taken place if they had listened in 1937 to what these people were saying. And there were a few courageous people from America that tried to fight fascism in Europe and tried to stop it for the world. And while they didn't succeed, at least their voices were heard. And I compare a lot of the people that support me in my work and do research or provide documents or get on the air and write articles or have newsletters and so forth as part of a similar kind of Lincoln Brigade. And the toughest nut to crack is that Hughes story. If we break that story open, then it won't be hard to flow the stories of the killings of hundreds of people since the end of World War II, and particularly the killings of John Kennedy, Robert Kennedy, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, Medgar Evers, and many of the domestic leaders who were opposed to fascism in their own way, not flaming liberals necessarily, but catching on to what was happening in America, refused to go along with the Pentagon, were exposing the Pentagon, and had to be killed. In 1974, in the Playgirl article, I mentioned the fact that some witness claimed that he saw Jacqueline Onassis and Senator Ted Kennedy in Greece, off an island in Greece, and that they claimed that a body was buried and that these two people attended that funeral. This was in 1971, in April 1971, and I specifically mentioned Ted Kennedy and Jacqueline Onassis as witnessing this burial and asked the question, and was it Howard Hughes that was buried? Because a source of much of my information had told me that that was the time in place that he was buried. Well, this last week, just as this used will is being settled in Las Vegas, Nevada, another will was settled, and that went to the Queen, Mrs. Jacqueline Onassis. She received $26 million from the estate of her ex-husband, Aristotle Onassis. The law and the will clearly stated that maximum she might have received $10 million, even though the people doling out the money couldn't stand her. But the Los Angeles Times, just September 20th, 1977, that Mrs. Onassis and her brother-in-law, Senator Edward Kennedy, began to press the will against Christina Onassis soon after the shipping magnate died, that he no sooner was dead than Ted Kennedy, the same person mentioned in my 1974 article, was by the side of Jacqueline Onassis. I had mentioned them, as I say, being together April 18th, 1971, and he was pressing for a settlement of $26 million for Jacqueline, $6 million taxes, $20 million of her pure cash, and she received that settlement this week. She not only received it this last week, but the one witness who would know what happened when Jacqueline Onassis moved into the scene, Jacqueline Kennedy moved in, was Marie Callas, the opera singer, age 53, died of a heart attack. She was in absolutely perfect health. She was preparing to write her autobiography for a New York publisher. Callas was immediately cremated, so there's no way of knowing whether she was poisoned or murdered. I'm sure her autobiography would have told us a lot because she was in love with Aristotle Onassis. She was living with him. She was kicked out very quickly when Jacqueline was sent to Greece. Jacqueline had a contract with Onassis. She spent about $20 million the first year on clothing and jewelry or whatever she wanted. She kept a contract. And when the old man croaked, and she wasn't with him when he left, she immediately asked for $26 million and got it. I wonder if that had anything to do, that settlement this last week, with the historical questions I was asking in 74. Was this a payoff, this $26 million, for the body that was buried? We won't know unless you get these people under sworn testimony and some lie detector tests. But was this witness who saw this body in the sea, a Major Cordray, witnessing the burial of Howard Hughes, April 18th, 1971. So with people, attorneys and prominent people pressing for the body to be exhumed in Houston, Texas, where I claim that it's Vance Cooper and not Howard Hughes, and with the settlement of Jackie Onassis, the sudden death of Marie Callas, we may see some fireworks in the next months to come. The case in Las Vegas has been put off till November. That gives Terry Moore and Douglas Wallace and the other Hughes employee time to get their information together, and so look for some excitement along those lines. Well, now to the ABC network. Lawrence Schiller wrote a TV movie for ABC, 2 hours, Friday and Sunday evenings, and the story, it was bad. I'm going to take point by point, I believe, if it takes 4 or 5 weeks of dialogue conspiracy, just to give you the major gross lies and how the movie was put together. I tape recorded it. I've typed up the first half hour of the show and have 20 typewritten pages of angry answers to the way this project was done on the screen. If you don't like this kind of propaganda, I'll give you the address to write. Write to the public files. Ask for your letter to be put in the public files of ABC Press Relations, 1330 Avenue of Americas, New York City, New York, 10019. The trial of Lee Harvey Oswald, this 2-part show, is made of absolute lies and propaganda, misinformation, blatant stories with no basis in fact. And in order to understand or appreciate the perversion of this entire story, I suggest that you read the current October 4th issue of Rolling Stone. Be sure to get it, on the use of the CIA in the news media. I won't talk about the article now. I want to talk about the way ABC still works, but ABC is mentioned in the article as being a conduit of CIA money, and even though they pass it off as something in the past, it certainly is present every single day that ABC is on the air. And until they begin to tell some truths about what happened to the killing of the President of the United States, just giving the facts without the interpretation, I will always believe that they serve the CIA. I spent 8 years cross-filing every single word of the Warren Commission hearings. That's not an easy job to do, 26 volumes. That took about 8 years of work, and I retyped it into about 28,000 pages and put it into about 30 or 40 spiral notebooks and broke the subject matter into Oswald's contacts, his sources of introduction, his finances, every cent that he earned, the jobs that he had, and Oswald the agent, every contact he had in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, in the Marines, in the Soviet Union, in Mexico, in New Orleans. So I didn't leave out and select just what I wanted to know to prove a certain point. I cross-filed every single word from every single witness to come up with my opinions. Every single person on the Warren Commission staff was Central Intelligence Agency. You can pick that up even from the minutes of the Warren Commission themselves, their selection of their lawyers. Every single person that Lee Harvey Oswald contacted in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, New Orleans, Mexico, Dallas, Texas, was from the intelligence community. Either the FBI, the CIA, the Defense Intelligence Agency, or the Defense Industry Security Command. The Warren Commission had absolutely no hard evidence to prove that Lee Harvey Oswald killed John Kennedy. And the fact is that you can't even buy the Warren Report at any bookstore anymore. It's off the print. If the Warren Report was a subject upon which the ABC and CBS make their movies, why don't they allow us to see it? The New York Times used to publish it. There was another private publisher that had it out. I believe it was Bantam. I have all 4 copies. The government printing office, the hardbound copy with an introduction by Louis Neitzer, the paperback that the New York Times put out, and then the other paperback with an introduction to Mr. Donovan. When we tried to give a course at Monterey Peninsula College several years ago, the first accredited course on the assassinations and killing of President John Kennedy, I gave it with Ray Fabrizio out there. We wanted a textbook of the Warren Report, and you can't buy it. It isn't even for sale. And yet they have the nerve to make a documentary that changes even what the Warren Report had and distort from there, because you can't even check it with the original port, and the report didn't line up to the 26 volumes. For those who aren't familiar with this work, because we will be going into depth on it for a few weeks on Dialogue Conspiracy, on the ABC Abuse of History, the 26 volumes consisted of 16 volumes of witness testimony before the Warren Commission and another 10 volumes of exhibits from the FBI, CIA, Police Department, affidavits, and court records, and from the Marines, Oswald State Department records, and so forth. When the Warren Report was written, their conclusions had no basis in fact based upon the evidence or testimony of the 26 volumes. And now ABC comes along and has things on the air, television, that can't even be found in the Warren Report. I'll give you one example. On their show, the second part of the show, they have the police in Dallas, Texas, talking on the telephone, and Lyndon Johnson picks up the telephone. And he says to the police department, there was no conspiracy. And they say, no conspiracy. No right wing, no left wing. And one policeman says, do you believe that? He was told Oswald did it alone by Lyndon Johnson. Do you believe that? And the other person says, well, I guess I've just been told what to think. Now that is a distortion of history. That's just one example of the script. Lyndon Johnson didn't have to call the police department and tell them that Lee Harvey Oswald did it alone. Lyndon Johnson, 3 months before his death, had said, we have a murder incorporated, we, the CIA, in the Caribbean. He was on Air Force One going back to Washington, D.C., and 45 minutes after John Kennedy was killed, the Pentagon called Lyndon Johnson and told him Oswald did it alone. There was no conspiracy. And that's the fine difference here. The Pentagon wrote the Warren Report. Mr. Otto Winnecker from Germany was the historian who sent in 2 military men to write the Warren Report. This is in the minutes of the Warren Commission meetings, how Mr. Winnecker was selected. The historian for the Pentagon is a German, Mr. Winnecker. The shots were fired, and immediately after Lyndon Johnson left Parkland Hospital and was on the airplane, he was told, it was exactly 46 minutes after the shooting, what to say. The Pentagon embarrassed President Eisenhower. They brought down the U-2 flight against his wishes. The Pentagon broke up the peace conference. In 1968, that Lyndon Johnson wanted. They broke up the détente with Russia that Richard Nixon wanted, and with China. Our relationships there are worse than ever, before the Pentagon told Lyndon Johnson the answers. And in this movie, they have Lyndon Johnson telling the police department it wasn't Johnson at all. He was taking orders from the Pentagon, and that's the difference. When John Kennedy refused to take orders from the Pentagon, when he refused to invade Cuba, when he refused to escalate Vietnam and wanted the troops to come home, then he had to be killed. That's when he had to be killed. So this is the kind of distortion that ABC had, and we'll go into it in detail. I also want to share on Dialogue Conspiracy some of the information of the selling of the first Warren report. So you can see the barrage of the CIA, Voice of America, U.S. Information Radio in 1964, and then lead you into 1977, how they're doing the same thing. As early as August 14th, 1964, that isn't early, actually it was 1 month before the Warren Report was published, Bert Griffin, an attorney on the staff, wrote to Howard Willans and said, as far as the chapter of Jack Ruby is concerned, the preface and conclusion that the commission found no evidence that anyone assisted Ruby in the shooting of Oswald is true only because we have not conducted an investigation to exhaust that possibility. But inasmuch as Jack Ruby is still alive and continues to dicker concerning his fate, it would be a mistake for the commission to make that statement. Now that's the clue, because Jack Ruby was alive and dickering for his fate and admitting they haven't gone into the conspiracy. They said, we'll just say that as far as we have gone, we found that no one aided or encouraged Ruby. But that was a letter from the Warren Commission and lawyers, one to the other, that they couldn't categorically say it, but they'd say, as far as we have gone. Now, as much as Ruby is alive and dickering for his fate is what the Warren Commission said in 1964. If George DeMohrenschildt were alive, the same gentleman that was killed in Florida that was Lee Harvey Oswald's CIA contact, then this ABC movie couldn't come out. The CBS movie couldn't come out. The book by Michael Edos that's on the book stands now couldn't come out. It has no credibility. The book by Marina Oswald called Marina and Lee that's coming out soon. None of these would stand up if George DeMohrenschildt were alive. He had to be killed. He was Lee Harvey Oswald's closest contact, and he had to be killed in order for this propaganda mill to continue. Jack Ruby had to be killed because he was slipping letters out that Lyndon Johnson and people in Texas were involved in the killing of John Kennedy. He slipped that out of the jail, and he had to be killed. Willem Altman, the Dutch journalist that I've mentioned on Dialogue Conspiracy, was on Good Morning America, and he was naming a General Donaldson who knows who ordered the killing of John Kennedy, the very highest level. And that's what I'm going to tell you tonight, what Mr. Altman has said, only because he received 17 death threats on his life, this Dutch journalist. He's hiding in Holland. The Washington Post and the New York Times would not carry his story. If his story were true, then ABC and CBS and these publishers would have to fold up shop and reinvestigate what happened to John Kennedy. But Mr. Altman isn't allowed to tell the people in this country who controls this show and who ordered George DeMohrenschildt to be with Lee Harvey Oswald. And I promised you I would name a name. Some of you can guess. I'm sure you can guess, but in case you can't, Mr. Altman has told persons on radio, telephone, across the ocean from Holland that Mr. Nelson Rockefeller ordered the killing of John Kennedy. Now somebody tells the Pentagon what to do, and I've never mentioned his name on Dialogue Conspiracy. I have said that George DeMohrenschildt carried the name of Nelson Rockefeller with him in 1941 while he traveled with his Nazi relatives into Mexico and had credit from Chase Manhattan Bank. But Mr. Altman's life is in danger, and I think he should get this out. George DeMohrenschildt had information. Oswald was a patsy. He felt guilty that he had controlled Lee Harvey Oswald the way he did. I don't know if we'll ever get a hold of George DeMohrenschildt's book, but I think it's important to note that ABC and CBS and NBC, if they want, and all of these channel networks can continue this propaganda mill. And as I say, we'll go into the details for weeks to come on this show to show you the difference of fact or fiction. And what I will be sharing with you are the pages of information from the sworn testimony and the exhibits, and not from the history of ABC. It was the hope at the time John Kennedy was killed that people would believe that Oswald did it alone. That was the first cover-up. The next cover-up would be, well, Oswald was influenced by Russian propaganda. He was a Marxist. That's the next layer of cover-up. The next layer of cover-up would be that Fidel Castro killed John Kennedy to retaliate because the CIA wanted to kill Castro. That's about the third level of where ABC was this evening on their story. The next layer is that anti-Castro Cubans and a small group from the CIA went out of hand and killed Kennedy for the abortive Bay of Pigs. That's the fourth cover-up. The next layer is that the anti-Castro Cubans and the organized crime set up the killing of Fidel Castro and then retaliated against John Kennedy for calling off the Bay of Pigs. And they will use the dead bodies of John Rossello and Sam Giancana and various Cubans to blame for the killing of Kennedy. Now, the committee, the House Committee investigating the assassination back in Washington, has asked that Lauren Hall and all the top members of the organized crime be given immunity to state their evidence on the killing of John Kennedy. This means that the CIA has used the mafia since 1947, since the CIA first started. Now they're going to use mafia and organized crime and the living witnesses that could be prosecuted for many, many crimes as witnesses to the killing of John Kennedy, even though they are known murderers, known perjurers, been thieves all of their lives who made their money off of gambling and prostitution. These people are going to be given immunity from prosecution for anything that follows, and they can say things on the stand that have no basis in fact either. And the desperation of the committee back there is to keep the information away from the defense, the Pentagon, the Eastern Seaboard, and the Southern oil people who all combine to have John Kennedy killed. The next layer of cover-up, if necessary, will be that the Russians killed John Kennedy, that they substituted Lee Harvey Oswald in Minsk, Russia, and put in another person, and that the one who was in the Marines never came home. He's floating around or in outer space somewhere, and that the other Oswald came home and killed John Kennedy for the KGB. But as I say, you go to the higher level, and when you get to level 7 of this huge pyramid of lies, which all of you, I'm sure, will live long enough to see because so much evidence is coming in, you will get the truth, and you will know that the United States government had good experience for these coups d'etat. We pulled it off in Brazil with a military dictatorship. We pulled it off with the CIA in Greece in 1967. We overthrew Iran, Mossadegh, who was going to nationalize the oil and put in the Shah of Iran in 1954. We changed the governments in Indonesia, against the CIA against Sukarno. We changed the government in Guatemala in 1957 and put in a West Point graduate, Mr. Somoza. We overthrew Salvador Allende in Chile. We put in dictatorships in the Dominican Republic, Costa Rica, Laos, Cambodia, Venezuela, Argentina, and Ecuador. So the only thing left now is for the American people to recognize that they had the same treatment that all of these countries had, that the same agencies were very expertise. By 1963, they had put in a lot of military dictatorships, and after 1963, they really were able to swing along after Diem was killed in Southeast Asia and put in through and march along with the dictatorships. As I say, it won't be too many years before you know the truth, and now that you have the stepping stones tape recorded, you can play them over if you want, if you have tapes of these shows. And remember the progress of sequence as it builds up the cover stories of who killed John Kennedy. And so the beat goes on. We will go at length, as I say, next week. This half hour is up. I will go at length into the 1964 cover-up of the Warren Commission hearings based upon material I have of correspondence of the members with each other, with the Voice of America, the CIA, on how they were going to sell the Warren Report. And then we'll go into the ABC programs, and then by the time we finish those, we'll be into the CBS cover-up. And then you'll have some yardstick by which to measure the lies that are being put out by the major media each generation or every year to the American people. Well, this is Mae Brussell in Carmel, California. Our time is up, and I'll see you next week on Dialogue Conspiracy.
You've been listening to Dialogue Conspiracy with Mae